Have you ever thought about whether a place, like a person, can just completely change its identity? Can it just shake off a bad reputation and start all over again with a brand new name? Well, today we're diving into the story of a village that did exactly that. It traded a name that was basically synonymous with chaos for one that sounds, well, pretty peaceful and idyllic. This is the amazing story of Hazel Grove. Okay, so let's get right into it. On one side, you've got Bullock Smithy. It just sounds tough, right? Industrial, maybe a little gritty. And on the other, Hazel Grove, which conjures up these images of, I don't know, pleasant, leafy suburbs. So the big question is, why? Why did a village called Bullock Smithy decide all the way back in 1836 to completely rebrand itself? What on earth was so wrong with the original name? Well, here's our first major clue, and wow, it is a powerful one. This comes from the Journal of John Wesley, the famous founder of Methodism, after he visited in 1788. And he did not mince words. He called it a place famous for all manner of wickedness. So this wasn't just a place with a funny name. This was a village with a serious, serious reputation problem. So, how does a place even get a reputation for all manner of wickedness? To really get that, we need to go back to the beginning and look at where these two totally different names came from. The first name, Bullock Smithy, is actually incredibly straightforward. The whole place grew around a single, very practical business. Back in 1560, a blacksmith named Richard Bullock set up his forge, his smithy, right there on a major road. And the entire village's identity literally just sprang up around this one guy's workshop. And its location, that was everything. The village was right on what would eventually become the A6, a major artery connecting industrial Manchester down to London. Now, this was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it meant constant traffic, travelers, and business, but being a convenient stopping point also had a way of attracting a certain kind of crowd and a certain kind of character. Which brings us to what life was really like in Bullock Smithy. Let's peel back the layers on that whole wickedness thing that John Wesley was talking about and see why it got, as one source put it, such a doubtful reputation. Now, this is where it gets really interesting, because this is like the perfect recipe for chaos. First, because it was a travel hub, you had a ton of inns and pubs, which naturally fueled a lot of unruly behavior. But the real structural problem was its governance. The village wasn't one place. It was awkwardly split between 4 different administrative areas, or manors. So imagine that, 4 different bosses, which means no one was truly in charge. And for a long time, it didn't even have a central church to act as a kind of community anchor. And if you thought John Wesley was harsh, check this out. Nearly 40 years after his visit, a church inspector came through and basically said the same thing, but in official speak. This wasn't just a rowdy village. It was a place so lacking in moral and civic structure that an inspector believed it was the single most church-deprived spot in the entire kingdom. That is saying something. So with a reputation like that, you can totally see why the villagers might want a fresh start, right? And that fresh start came in the form of a dramatic, community-wide decision. And this wasn't some slow, organic shift. No way. This was a decisive public act. On August 29, 1836, the whole community came together with one very clear goal: to kill Bullock Smithy and give birth to a totally new identity. And here you have the two competing stories. The official line was very polite. They were simply reviving an old name, maybe from a nearby area with hazel trees. But the speculated, and let's be honest, far more compelling reason was that this was a deliberate rebranding. It was a calculated attempt to escape a name that wasn't just uncouth, but was literally synonymous with wickedness and chaos. And you can see just how much this meant to everybody from this number. 5,000 people showed up for the celebration. 3,000 villagers marched in a parade. I mean, this was a massive public spectacle. This was the entire community together saying, we are not Bullock Smithy anymore, we are Hazel Grove. So let's just lay this out on a quick timeline. The story kicks off with the smithy in 1560, hits a real low point with Wesley's visit in 1788, has its big revolutionary moment in 1836, and the new identity is so successful that they're still celebrating it 150 years later in 1986. But look, a new name and a big party are one thing. How did the newly christened Hazel Grove actually go about forging a new, more respectable identity? Well, the first step was fixing that chaotic governance problem we talked about. It took a few decades after the name change, but finally, in 1900, the different areas were unified into a single council. This was absolutely crucial. You can see the shift right here, from that tangled mess of four manors to a single unified community, which eventually became part of the larger borough of Stockport. Next up was a total economic overhaul. The village moved way beyond just being a town of inns and workshops. It became home to Merle's, a massive diesel engine manufacturer whose engines powered ships and trains all over the world. It built the huge Stepping Hill Hospital, a major local employer, and even today it hosts the UK headquarters for a global brand like Adidas and a high-tech semiconductor plant. This is a world away from the simple economy of Bullock Smithy. Okay, so let's fast forward and see what the village that so desperately wanted to change has become here in the 21st century. From a small, notorious stop on a coaching route, it's now a pretty substantial residential area with over 20,000 people. I'd say the rebranding didn't exactly hurt its growth. And what's really fascinating is how transport, the very thing that first defined Bullock Smithy's chaotic character, is still central to Hazel Grove's identity today. You can see it right here. The A6 road is still the village's main artery, just like it was in the 16th century, and the famous 1902 bus route is its modern lifeline, constantly connecting it to the wider world. So it all brings us back to this question: how much power does a name really have? I mean, the rebranding of 1836 seems to have been a remarkable success. But it does make you wonder, does any of that lively, unruly, and maybe even wicked spirit of Bullock Smithy, a village known for its inns and meeting places, still live on somewhere in the heart of modern, respectable Hazel Grove? Something to think about.